Mike Moylan suddenly shot up in bed, wincing in pain. He had a blinding headache. Mike got out of bed and tried to stand up. He walked across his bedroom into his bathroom where he opened the medicine cabinet, grabbed some painkillers, swallowed 3 of them, and then walked back into his bedroom. Before he lay down again, he noticed there was a dark spot on his pillow. His wife April was fast asleep in bed with him, so he didn't want to flip the lights on and wake her up, but he had a feeling that that spot was likely blood. And so he ran his hands all over his head to see if there was blood coming off of him, and he found some on his right ear. And so he thought to himself, well, I guess my wife must have elbowed me in my sleep, that's why I'm bleeding, and that's why my head hurts. He laid back down and waited for the meds to kick in so he could sleep. But after 30 minutes of complete restlessness, it seemed like his headache was getting progressively worse, and his ear continued to bleed. Mike woke up his wife April and told her, we gotta go to the hospital right away. And April, who's half asleep, seemed very confused, but eventually got the message, and they got up, they hopped in her car, and she drove them to the emergency room. As soon as they got there, doctors x-rayed Mike's head. A nurse walked in holding onto an x-ray image, and she held it up to the light, and she pointed to a foreign object in Mike's skull, and she says, well, it looks like you got shot. Mike couldn't believe it, and neither could the nurse or any of the doctors. He should have been dead. Mike was quickly ushered into emergency surgery, where after a couple of hours, they were able to remove the bullet from his head. The police showed up and began asking questions about what happened. After speaking to the couple, April revealed that she slept with a pistol underneath her pillow, and that maybe it had fired accidentally. And then when they really dug into this, her story began to unravel, and eventually she would confess that she had in fact tried to kill Mike and shot him while he was sleeping. She told police the reason she did it is she had recently destroyed one of the couple's successful businesses, but Mike had not found out about it yet. And so she decided she would kill him before he could find out. After her confession, Mike was crushed and felt like an idiot, but he would tell police that there were a couple of red flags about his wife that he noticed on the night he actually woke up with this headache. For one, when he told her, hey, I want to go to the hospital because I'm bleeding out of my ear, she apparently took a really long time getting dressed and acted overly confused about what was happening, well beyond the I'm just tired routine. And then when they got in the car, she was driving impossibly slow and he was asking her to speed up and she just wouldn't. And so Mike realized now that what she was really doing was hoping if she just delayed long enough, he might die before they reached the hospital. April was jailed on attempted murder charges, but just a year after being in prison, she was released on a plea deal. In the 1970s, Ken Rex McElroy began stalking a local Skidmore girl who was 12 years old named Trina. After assaulting her dozens of times, Rex learned her family was going to be pressing charges against him. So Rex burned down Trina's family's house and killed the family dog, and then threatened to kill the entire family unless they signed paperwork that would legally marry their daughter Trina to Rex. Trina was forced to come live with Rex at his house, and within 2 years, she became pregnant. After the birth of her child, she took her baby and tried to run away from Rex, and she ran back to her family's new house, and she was hiding there, but Rex tracked her down. He took her and their baby back, and then Rex proceeded to burn her family's house down again, and again killed their new family dog. In 1980, one of Rex's children was at a local grocery store in Skidmore when they were caught stealing a piece of candy. When the shopkeeper asked the child to put the candy back, they refused, and it caused this huge fight. And before long, Rex has found out about this huge fight. He becomes enraged that the shopkeeper had the audacity to accuse his child of a crime. And so Rex began stalking the owner of the store, a 70-year-old man named Bo, along with the rest of Bo's family. At all hours of the night, Rex would just show up in front of their house with a gun slung across his lap, and then during the day, he would walk right up to Bo and he would tell him, I'm going to kill you. In July of that year, Rex showed up at Bo's grocery store with a shotgun in hand. They have this heated confrontation where at some point Rex just raises a shotgun and he fires a shot into Bo's neck. Bo was gravely wounded, but he would survive, and Rex would actually get arrested and would be charged with attempted murder. The attempted murder charge was lowered to just assault, and he was given 2 years in prison, but he would only serve 1 day in jail before being released on bond. And so city leaders at this point, they've had enough of Rex. They begin discussing, how are we going to handle Rex? How are we going to put an end to his reign of terror? And after a while, they came up with a plan. And after the meeting was done, everybody left the town hall, they got their guns, and they made their way over to the tavern where Rex was seen earlier that morning. About 40 of these armed men surrounded the outside of this tavern, and once they were all in place, another smaller group of men that were all armed walked inside the tavern, and they saw Rex sitting at the bar with Trina sitting right next to him. So these men, they walk up right behind Rex, and they just stand there with their guns looking at him. And at some point, Rex turns around and sees them, but he realizes he's totally outnumbered, and so he stands up, he grabs Trina, and he brushes past them, trying to act tough, and he walks out of the tavern. When he gets outside, he's taken aback at this additional group of armed men, which is much larger, who are all standing there just looking in at him. And so Rex, at this point, becomes visibly frightened, but he grabs Trina, and he calmly walks out to his truck, which is parked a little ways out in front of the tavern, and Rex lights a cigarette up, he turns on his truck, and he's about to try to drive away when a gunshot rings out, and Rex immediately slumps forward onto his wheel. One of the Skidmore residents runs up to the truck, they open up the passenger side, and they grab Trina, who was unhurt, pulled her out, and rushed her to safety. Once she was clear, the other residents with their guns just moved in on the truck, and for 20 seconds they opened fire. Everyone just stood there and watched as the town bully died. In all, there were 46 witnesses that were there when Rex was murdered, but they all said they had either not seen the shooting or they didn't know who the shooter was. And despite a lengthy federal investigation, none of the witnesses ever changed their stories. And so as a result, no one was ever charged with Rex's murder. Years later, a Skidmore resident, when asked what happened here, they just said that man needed a killing. Robert Pickton was born in 1949 in Port Coquitlam in British Columbia. He, along with his brother and sister, were raised by their parents on a big pig farm. Over the next couple of decades, Robert and his brother attempted to run the pig farm, but pretty quickly they stopped taking care of it and it fell into decline. Eventually, the Pickton brothers realized they were not cut out to run the pig farm, and they decided their best move was just to sell portions of their land. From 1994 to 1995, they managed to sell off almost all of their property to an urban developer for over $5 million. And so suddenly, these filthy, failed pig farmers had become millionaires, and neither of them knew what to do with the money. And so they established an official charity in 1996 called the Piggy Palace Good Times Society. What it ultimately became was a guise to host these wild-fueled parties inside of their slaughterhouse. These Piggy Palace parties became infamous in Coquitlam, drawing crowds of up to 2,000 people from the poverty-stricken downtown east side of Vancouver. Once the Piggy Palace charity was in full swing, Robert started going back into that neighborhood and would attempt to recruit people to come to his parties. At the same time Robert was running this recruiting campaign, women from the downtown east side began disappearing in droves. Rumors of a serial killer operating in that area started to circulate. When the police were finally contacted about all these missing women, their response was lacking, to say the least. Since there were no bodies of these missing women, the police said it was reasonable to assume that the women were to blame. When Robert got back to the farm, Bill Hiscox, the one worker who still worked for the Picktons, he grew very suspicious of Robert. And so he called the Crime Stoppers tip line, and he told them that he thought Robert was most likely behind some or all of these missing women from the downtown east side. Over the next few years, the Picktons continued to throw these huge Piggy Palace parties until the city finally shut them down. Finally, in 2002, a former employee of the Pickton farm came forward to police and said that he personally had seen illegal weapons inside of Robert's trailer. And this was enough information for the police to get a search warrant and raid the pig farm. And they found inside of Robert's trailer the illegal guns, as well as several items directly connected to some of the missing women from the downtown east side. Robert was arrested but let out on bail. He was put under surveillance and told he could not go back to the farm until they were done conducting a more thorough search. And during that more thorough search, they found blood from one of the missing women inside of Robert's trailer. And so Robert was rearrested and charged with murder. While he was being held in jail, he shared his cell with another man. He was actually an undercover police officer, and their entire interaction was being recorded.
I find the best way is full of something big in the ocean. Bigger than that. I've done it one more, maybe 50. Fill the syringes up with antifreeze, and you inject yourself, and you're dead in better than 10 minutes. One more, we can even bigger than the ladies, bigger than the months in the States. Yeah. Okay.
As Robert admits in this video, he killed 49 people, who would turn out to be the majority of the missing women from the downtown east side. After a lengthy investigation, it was determined Robert's killing spree began in 1991, but it really kicked up a notch in 1996 when he and his brother started Piggy Palace. He would lure them into his trailer, where he would handcuff them, tell them it's over now, and he would inject antifreeze into them, or he would strangle them to death. Afterwards, he would move the victim's body to the slaughterhouse, where he would butcher them like a pig. A large portion of his victims' remains would be fed to his pigs, and the parts he didn't feed to his pigs, he would bring to the rendering plant in the downtown east side. A rendering plant takes animal waste products, crushes them up, and turns them into a gelatin, which means Robert's victims wound up in things like lipstick and gummy bears. Also, sometimes while Robert was going through this horrific disposal process, he would set aside some of the best cuts of meat and grind them up with pork and turn them into sausage. This sausage was served at Piggy Palace parties. It was also given to neighbors and food banks and orphanages. Investigators were only ever able to find little bits of remains of 26 women. Robert was charged with all 26 murders, but only 6 turned into convictions due to a lack of evidence. He was sentenced to life in prison and is still alive today.